So welcome to another episode. This is Mike Gruen. I'm here with Joseph Carson from Thycotic. I'll let him introduce himself.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here again, Mike. And we've had discussions in the past. And so I'm based in Tallinn, Estonia. I'm the chief security scientist, and I've been working from home for a long time. And given the current situation, I thought it would be good to have a discussion around some of the new experiences that I've had over the past 2 weeks that have been something that I'd never foreseen before.
Yeah, no, I agree. I used to work from home for a while, and I had two smaller kids. It was a little bit of a challenge, but a little bit easier because they just stayed on the other side of the door and didn't have as much because they were really little. There wasn't the homework and the rest of it. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed, by the way, I noticed you wrote a blog. I really enjoyed reading it. Is there anything, just sort of from there that you'd want to sort of some tips and things that you might want to summarize?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I've been working remotely for 15 years, and I've had a lot of lessons and experience from, electricity going off and having to switch to battery to make sure you stay connected. I've been in situations where I've had to take emergency calls from bus stops. I've been in remote islands doing webinars. Even the last, during the swine flu, I was actually self-quarantined for just over 2 weeks with the swine flu. Oh, so wow. I know what it's like to be in isolation as well. So some of the tips that I've had is really around making sure one of the most important things we always have that question starts off with is staying connected. That's where you kind of, when you're working remotely, you're working from home, one of the first things you want to think about is your connectivity. What's your network bandwidth? Is it limited or unlimited? Right. Are you sharing with other people, other family members? Now, it's not just you at home. You may have a bunch of kids, and you may have, your spouse or partner that are also connected and using up that. Some might be watching streaming. Some might be surfing, looking at, videos or whatever it might be, or listening to music, and you're having to also use, for work-wise. So, connectivity becomes important, understanding your bandwidth, switching off hungry bandwidth applications. Even, it gets into the point of security side of things is that your laptop's on the same network as those devices. Can they see each other? Is your file sharing enabled and print sharing that's enabled in those devices? So sometimes even I would recommend is when you're on a home network is you create a dedicated guest network that is separated and isolated just for your work devices. So therefore, you can also then maybe even decide to throttle other types of applications as well, or give time limits to the kids these days. Yeah. And that's where you kind of get into is that isolation. And then also thinking about when to switch between, using your wired Wi-Fi or mobile to get the almost optimum speed as well. And those are some of the things, and also make sure that your network itself and your home router is not default credentials. Most out there some might even be using older Wi-Fi authentication, even WPA or WPS that has known weaknesses. So it might be a time to make sure to revisit that and choose a much stronger and also change the default passwords as well. So connectivity, that was one of the most important lessons I learned is that wherever I am, I have to figure out how to stay connected.
Yeah, I totally can relate. Earlier this week, I got kicked off, or my laptop refused to join the Wi-Fi because there were too many other devices on the Wi-Fi. So definitely set up a separate one, a separate VLAN just for my work computer. One of the other things I think is interesting is knowing when to use the VPN. If my office has a VPN, when should I be on the VPN versus when shouldn't I be? Doing a Zoom VPN sometimes not ideal.
Exactly, and I've had the same thing. Is when all of a sudden recently, I have my VPNs on by default, and all of a sudden I have to switch into a Zoom call or go to a webinar or something, whatever it is to do it like a collaboration. All of a sudden it's just taking forever to connect, and I'm going, exactly. What's causing it? What's happening? And then you realize, okay, I've got VPN connected. And this might go through different, locations and different, different channels, and you're also using up additional bandwidth when you have a VPN on. So absolutely, you have to decide, when to disconnect and connect again, or hopefully it's at sleep. You might say turn it, off for 2 hours and it reconnects back again. Because security at this point is, you want to also, maintain connectivity, but at the same time, you also don't want to, increase the risk and disable security at the same time.
Right. Another thing my friends and I were just talking about yesterday with regard to VPN is make sure that your network doesn't collide with the corporate network. I use 172.16 at home because at several jobs ago they were using the 192.168, which is like that's what everybody's home is on. So just knowing how to troubleshoot that and recognize when there's collisions and how to deal with that is, I think, an important thing as well. Test out the VPN.
Absolutely. And I've had similar experiences, where, I'm in my kind of lab environment right now, and there's a lot of things that you wouldn't want to be connected. So sometimes you absolutely have to be very cautious. And I did, create a network that's been separated here just to make sure I don't have those collisions as well. So, but there's another big lesson I've learned. And a lot of things I can share is been good experiences, but one thing I know that every person and it's been different experiences over the past few weeks, and it's been sporadic. But the thing I faced I'm based in Estonia, and about a week and a half ago, we got the announcement that schools are closing. So I've been working home, and it's been no problem doing my things. Everything's been great. Moving along with my tasks and projects and so forth, doing my security research. And then all of a sudden, I've got the whole family at home, kids at home, and not just being at home and not having nothing to do, or just end up being on a computer watching whatever movies or whatever,
sucking up all your bandwidth.
And sucking up all the bandwidth. But they're doing homeschool, and so one of the things we quickly realized that this could go really bad. So me and my wife got together and we made a plan the weekend prior to it going, and we went through and we created a schedule. We mapped out all their classes that they have, the breaks that they have, what projects are going on. I set up, they, of course, and not every family has multiple laptops or devices they can use as well. And that also becomes a challenge. You might have to share one between, siblings. And so getting it all set up, getting a plan, and we thought we'd done everything from lunches, and we also set up a plan so that the kids could also help as well. So taking out the garbage, making breakfast and stuff.
Emptying the dishwasher, because our dishwasher is running nonstop now.
And even, sometimes even electricity companies are making, huge money right now because you're using it during peak times too. So wait till you see your electric bill.
Right, when's not peak times now, I mean, in a way.
Exactly. But these were, so came to the first Monday, and I set up my environment. So I had my working space at home. My wife had hers set up, and we had the kids set up. 10 minutes into it, it's all gone chaos. Questions, and my kids are doing Russian language, they're doing different tasks, or they're interrupting each other, so they're interfering with each other, and just goes, okay. No matter how any parent plans for this, not only are you working from home, but you're becoming a full-time teacher, a full-time chef, a full-time dishwasher, a full-time laundry person. It just means that you're taking on these additional tasks that you may have separated or done individually, and it's all happening at once. And what I find this past week and a half is that you really need to switch days, decide who's going to do what work one day, and then try to balance it back and forward. And get the kids really involved in also planning and having some reward system to make sure that they stay focused and motivated. And this is, I know that every listener to this is going to start relating it in somehow. Even worse is that when we started this a week and a half ago, and we thought, the schools announced that it was only homeschooling and for 2 weeks. One day into the second week, we got told that this is going to go on for another 3 weeks and maybe even to the end of the school year. And
yeah, we just got a similar notice.
I just put my hand on my head going, oh my goodness, how am I going to survive this? And I think this is, all my best practices and experiences working from home will help people. But these experiences, this is really about getting a balance. It's about good communication. It's about, everything you do for yourself work-wise, you'll have to actually incorporate that into your kids and your spouses and partners' lives. Is a really good, solid communication. Who's going to do what, when? And when you're in self-isolation or you're isolated and quarantined at home, you can't get out. It's not like I'll go for a walk and just get out of, get some fresh air. Is that you have to kind of bear with us during that time. And it's even getting the challenges you mentioned, dishwasher and stuff, is you open up the fridge in the morning and it's also empty. Right. And then you get into these other challenges. So for remote workers, I think this is going to be probably the most challenging, lessons learned that they'll ever have. Sometimes there's no way other, than jumping straight into it. But I've learned a lot of new things, and I can tell you in this past week, just like yourself, is bandwidth connectivity, and more devices connected through Wi-Fi than there's ever been before.
Right, exactly.
In time, and all day, 24/7, all day long. So staying connected, but also good planning will definitely help people get through this, and then prioritization, communication.
I mean, with staying connected and balanced, there's also a space for essentially disconnecting, or like one of the things when I first started working from home, I noticed was I just felt like I'm at work all the time. It's just easy. I could like, it didn't even, I didn't feel a burden of it. I just felt this draw of, oh yeah, I'll just spend another 5 minutes. And next thing I knew it was midnight. And you don't, just so making sure that you have that like disconnection. And one of the things that I do that I found really helpful was I have my room, I close the door, and I have this like threshold, right? When I cross this threshold, I'm in work mode. When I cross it in the other direction, I'm at home, and try to really not feel like I'm always at work. Like, and so, yeah, if I'm sitting at the TV and I have a brilliant idea, you know what? It can probably wait till tomorrow, just like it would have had I not been working from home.
Just write it down and put it to the things, the list to do later. I mean, I have the same. When working from home for the last 15 years, I made a decision actually 3 years ago. I had the same challenge. I used to have, even my home office door, I had a sign that said working, and the other side it said playing. So at least people knew that, I'm either in meetings, or I'm focused on a project, or I'm just doing research and playing. So at least people, in the house knew what activity you were doing at the time. If it was 9 o'clock at night, you had playing in the door, knew that it couldn't disturb you, and so forth. So it's really having that, also letting yourself know, but also letting other people know what you're doing as well. But I made a decision 3 years ago that I separated home office to a small office away from home. So that meant that, you're getting up, you're getting dressed in the morning, you're getting fresh air, and you have a bit of a walk. And it also has that separation, so that, I'm in the office working. It's, dedicated. So that having that, if you can't do that, not everyone can, but like yourself, have a dedicated place that you use all the time for this, for your work.
Right. I mean, it could even just be a spot at the kitchen table. I mean, it can, just, but I think it's important to be able to like sort of have that, like, I'm working now, I'm not working, like being able to turn that on and off.
I think it's having that sign, whether it being a Pomodoro timer or whatever it is that, we would use in the past for meetings, but having that timer and setting it for 45 minutes or an hour, and having that time where you'll get up and walk around. But you're absolutely right. You want to sit at the kitchen table, have a good seat that you're sitting up, having good lighting, having, power connected, having something that's dedicated to that work. And that means that you move away and leave it and come back. But it's also important to take breaks. One thing, it's not just about, having that stop and start when you do work, but also you need to stand up. One of the biggest things I find working from home is health. Is even if you're working from home, at the moment it might be difficult to do it, but even to walk out and get a 5-minute, 10-minute fresh air before you come in to start your work, just to have that type of separation, and standing up and doing some walking. At the moment, it's a bit, challenging with being quarantined or isolation in some places. Some people might be able to do it, some people not. But it's important to have that, get out, get dressed, go get some fresh air, take a walk, and then come back in and then start to work. Don't kind of just walk from your bedroom into the kitchen table and start working straight away. Have a routine, have a good plan that has these, repetitive things that you do. And I also recommend take your full breaks. Take your full coffee break. I remember when I started doing this years ago, that I would all of a sudden get a coffee, get a lunch, and I'd work through it, and I'd forget to take lunch, and you get into these bad habits of not taking the breaks. Take the breaks. And today, you might get on a Zoom call with a friend or a colleague or a peer and just have a chat. Because during these times, it's still important to communicate, to collaborate, to get some type of online social interaction. And I know people's been doing birthday parties online using Zoom, and people's been doing just virtual coffee hour or happy hour. And even
Yep,
tomorrow,
we have a virtual happy hour on Friday. We
we're doing.
started it with a smaller group, and now it's all the entire company is invited. We'll see how it goes on the Zoom.
That's awesome. I mean, that's so far it's been holding over. We're doing a pub quiz tomorrow for our happy hour in the evening, so we're looking forward to that. But definitely make sure you take your breaks, be sociable and collaborate. And one thing is, working from home, sometimes you feel a bit isolated, disconnected. You don't see what's happening. So one thing there's a couple of things I do through my week is on Monday morning, I cancel everything in my calendar and I block it just for reviewing and planning what I need to do for the week. All my tasks and schedules, reviewing what I was successful the previous week, doing a kind of somewhat, lessons learned and look back and what did I miss, what do I need to revisit again. Just taking that time to organize yourself is also critical. And then also during that time, I also see here's my tasks that I have throughout the week. Am I dependent on other people to help me with those tasks? Can I do it by myself? And also prioritizing it and making sure you keep that prioritization, and also make sure it's in sync with other people. That prioritizations tend to be changing. And sometimes when you are remote or, kind of working from home, that those prioritizations get lost or those focus get lost. So make sure that you also have those kind of weekly sync ups to make sure that everyone's going the same direction as well. Planning and prioritization and communication is key to making sure that we all stay going the same direction.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And one of the things that I find interesting is, so for a long time, I've been working, my lead infrastructure guy, he's fully remote, traveling the world frequently, 5 hours off, 12 hours off. It switches all the time. Right now he's 12 hours off. Having done that for a little while has sort of prepped me a little bit for what's going on now, because a lot of my coworkers that have smaller children and both parents are now, are home and both have jobs. The way they've sort of split things up is like, okay, from 5 a.m. until such and such a time, they're, they're working, and then they take over for a little bit in the afternoon. And then the other parent, and they sort of have split up their day. And so that means if I do need someone, it might mean, I'm going to actually have to get on at 8 o'clock tonight, because that's when they're actually planning on working, because during the day they were helping their kids with homework. So I think that's another thing to, sort of on that planning is, even if you are used to being all in the same time zone, that's a big change that's happened now. A lot of people are going to be working alternate hours than what they might have worked when they all have to come in.
And with that, I mean, during, at Thycotic, we do have a very kind of global workforce, and we, do a lot of collaboration. People are working from home, that's our norm.
Right. So
one thing is, we have to get into the point where we have to expect that, people are going to have uninterrupted guests coming into your calls. It wouldn't be, unusual to see, a dog in the background barking, or a baby crying, or kids looking for attention, or I've had, my cat would walk across the keyboard all of a sudden.
Yep, I was just going to say the cat across the keyboard is classic.
So, and I mean, we have to, as companies, employers as well, we have to make sure that, that's seen as okay and that's seen as normal, and we have to give them that attention, allow them to attend to the needs at the same time. So absolutely, finding that balance between, the family life and the business is important. And, we have to expect there will be, unexpected guests joining the calls at some point. And that's the norm. That's what we have to get into is, as people's working from home, they will have their family around them. And it's important to be also at the same time aware of who's around you. So even when you're talking about sensitive content, that might be company financial, it might be hiring processes, or it might be, acquisitional details, and you don't want those family members to hear, then decide, is now a good time to have those conversations, or can you reschedule it to later when it's a bit quieter, when no one's around? And not only about people, but also, about who, is your walls thin? Can your neighbors hear you? Are you on the balcony? Are you in the garden doing your calls? Being very aware of virtual assistants as well. Alexa's, in the background, that's always listening, always on. And if you're having sensitive conversations, be very, very aware. So some of my recommendations is, before you have those conversations, take a look around and just think about, is this the right environment to have those conversations? Get a good headset. Get a headset that allows you at least to mute one side of the conversation as well. Get a good microphone as well so that people can hear you clearly, so that you don't get muffled noises, you don't get white noise or background stuff. Get something that allows you to be heard clearly, because when you're working remote, a good headset and a microphone is essential to make sure you're communicating and that you're hearing correctly what people are saying, and also being able to people hear you also. So good headset and microphone.
It's funny you say that, because about 10 minutes before this call, I was scrambling. I was like, "Where's my headset?" Oh, that's right, I left it at the office. Perfect. So I had to hobble something together and for this. So, but yeah, I couldn't agree more that having a good quality headset and blocking half the conversation. The other thing that I think is especially with smaller kids and everybody has their own way of parenting, and sort of recognizing that some language that maybe is appropriate at the office is not appropriate for young kids, and maybe it's appropriate for your kids, and other people have a different opinion. So I think that's the other thing, is just being aware and also communicating effectively to other people on the call who might be within earshot, who they can't see. Just because you can't see them in the video doesn't mean that there's not somebody nearby. And if you're not wearing a headset, suddenly, my oldest actually used to pop in. He's like, "You're talking to Paul, aren't you?" Because he could tell by the person's language. Like, he's the only one who drops F-bombs all the time.
So, that's when headsets come in very helpful.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that really, is also the one challenge I've always had with working remotely is time zones. And there's a comical meme going around right now about this weekend in Estonia, we're putting the clocks forward 1 hour, and everyone's saying, can we move it a bit further? Can we move it 6 months? can we move the clock forward 6 months?
Right.
But also being very aware of people's time zones. So you're saying, your point is, in the US, it might be a little bit, where you've got multiple states having, East Coast, West Coast, and so forth. And in Europe, we have multiple time zones to deal with. But just be very conscious of the other person's time zones as well. And make sure that you all always have a kind of company culture of what time zone you're talking about. Have a standard that's agreed upon beforehand. And when I'm always kind of, scheduling calls or meetings or whatever it might be, I'm always putting, here's my time zone. This is where, and talk about your local time zone and be very clear when you're doing those. So time zones is one thing I do hate, but there's a lot of tools out there that's making it easier today. It helps, have that visibility of when people are available and what time it is in their local location.
Yeah. The person I referred to earlier who's traveling around, he has an integration in Slack so that it actually says like what time is it where he is, because he's traveling all the time. So it's not like I can just remember, oh yeah, that's right, he's 12 hours or 4 hours. So that's a handy thing. And then one of the things I also learned to do was like Google Calendar has the ability to add a second time zone. So I deal a lot with people on the West Coast. So let's just add that as a time zone as well, just so I can sort of eyeball it really quickly. Nothing more frustrating than saying, "Oh yeah, I'll talk to you at 10," and have two different definitions of what 10 is.
I had the same today. I was like, was a scheduling call for 1 o'clock today, and I was talking about, I wanted, can we have the call at 2? And they're like, yeah, we'll schedule it 2, assuming I was in the same time zone.
Right.
And all of a sudden, I was like, I'm looking at the calendar invite, it's like 1. I was like, oh, okay. Now you have to kind of work around. So that's a challenge. And the other thing as well, is collaboration. I think it's really important to choose the right tools as well. You mentioned Slack, and we're using Zoom here to have this conversation across the world, and they all work well. But it's really important as well to make sure that in these times, frequent communication is so more important, especially knowing what the other person's doing, what you're working on, having that. I know that even if I went 6 months without being in the office, sometimes you just want to have a call or video call.
Right.
So sometimes now is a good time to even put the camera on and have that visualization rather than just doing audio conferences, and have that sense of team and, knowing and getting to know how you communicate and how you interact with each other is critical. So, and knowing what's the right tool. If you're going to have more sensitive conversations, then maybe certain social tools are not the right ones. That might have be sharing data, might be collecting certain data. So choosing the right tool for the right type of communication is also critical. So I would tend to kind of, switch between things that like, whether being Slack for that just frequent collaboration and sharing and making sure, kind of like a replacement for email, but also using WhatsApp to do certain types of calls when you're on the go, or you don't need to have certain connectivity. Making actual phone calls, getting on the phone and communicating, using Zoom or GoToMeeting, using Signals or Telegram for different types of conversations. I even know that some journalists and some of my peers, I even get to the point where outbound communications is using one and inbound communications using another. So if it's something very sensitive,
right,
talking about maybe a data breach or investigation, that they want to make sure that if even they were hacked or were data breached, and we got one of those, that they only get one context of the communication. So some going that extreme, but definitely use the right tool for the right type of communication is critical.
I'd also say making sure you have a backup. So right now, like in our office, if Slack went down, we can still talk to each other. But now that you're remote, like if Slack went down, what would we do? And we had, luckily, Slack had gone down a couple of years ago, and I think it was like 2017 or so. And so we have a fallback, and everyone on my team, all of the engineers, on day one, when you start as an engineer at Cybrary, you get on Keybase. And that's our fallback for like communications. It's also what we use for sending super secure stuff that needs to be, sensitive, end-to-end encryption. So, and sharing. So it's a tool that we already use, but then we also can fall back to. And then last week we had problems with phones. Our sales team, we had just switched from one phone provider to another. I'm not going to name any names. And they were having a lot of problems. And luckily we hadn't fully, we still had the old account. So when the new one was having problems, we could fall back to the, and I think making sure that you have those plans is an important piece as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are all part of the crisis management and incident response types of things you have. And, I've always been, that's one of my kind of back, history experiences. I've been involved in lots of incidents and lots of kind of disaster scenarios.
Remind me not to work with you.
Yeah. I'm still here. I always, they always say, there's a term, if I fell into like a river of mud, I would come out smelling like roses. There's a common saying that we have, and that's one thing that I've been always fortunate, even during, whether being when I had swine flu and isolated. I remember, this similar disruptions with flights, because I do travel a lot as well. And I remember when I was on my way coming back from Vegas during a major event, and Iceland volcano decided to erupt. And it meant that all flights going from US to Europe had been canceled. So you have similar experiences, and you look at those situations and how do you deal with them. And, you just looked at it and you're like, well, it is what it is. And you'll find ways to get home, or you find ways in order to get by. And it's the same as now, is unfortunately, with the coronavirus that's going around, that, we're in a crisis management situation, and it's not just one company or one region, it's the world. I think it's 1/3 or 1/4 of the world is right now is in lockdown, or shut down for at least 2 to 4 weeks. And that does put a lot of incident response. And some of my experience as well, just like you mentioned, you might be in transition of two technologies, and sometimes that's your saver, is that you haven't completely left the first one to go to the second one. But since the second one's unavailable, at least the first one is an option. And I've had similar situations. I remember I was working in foreign exchange and money markets. I'm a certified trader from past, because some of the technologies, I like to know what it's like to be a user. And I've worked in situations where transatlantic communication went down. And it was lucky enough that we still hadn't left we were transitioning all of the cables and ISPs across to a new faster. And that was the one that went down. And we were lucky enough, we had an old, I think it was like a 64K line from an old ISP, and we switched all transatlantic communications over that one line. Lucky enough, because it hadn't been decommissioned and removed, it was still there. And it meant we were able to continue actually European, North American foreign exchange and money markets through that link. Wow. So you're always in a situation. It's always important to think about, backup means and backup communications and alternative means. These are so critical right now. Even at Thycotic, we have multiple, and it's also not just based on types of communications and failures. It's also based on time as well. We have a 20-minute turnaround in one, a 2-hour turnaround in another, a 2-day turnaround in another, and they all fall back to each other in different means of communication. So if it's critical, just get on the phone call. If it's urgent, use this means. If it's not so urgent, go to another method.
Right.
So having multiple means of communication is critical. But one of the things is, from a security perspective right now, if you look at the IT security professional, their job right now must be chaotic. If I'm looking at, I even saw, in the surroundings I am here, people were going into their offices, packing up their laptops, their computers, everything that was at the desktops, and they were going in different times of the day to do so. And they're walking out the door, putting those laptops, desktops in the trunk of even huge iMac monitors and screens, taking it all out of the office, in the trunk of the car, driving it home and setting it up at home. This is the biggest mass movement to working from home ever.
Yep.
And it means that, you look at that, first of all, if you're a security professional, you're thinking about what's on those devices. What data is on those devices? Is it sensitive? And, do they have local administrator access? What applications are on those devices? Can they still function? And now all of a sudden, those are taking from the secure corporate network, where you had security kind of boundaries and security controls and IDSs and firewalls, kept people from going into bad websites. And you take those devices from a secure network, you walk them out the door, and you put them into people's home unsecure environments.
Right.
I mean, that must be chaos and a headache for any IT security professional right now to be watching that happening.
Yeah, I'm really lucky in that everything we do, there's not, like the laptops, there's nothing stored locally. There's nothing. We frequently have this happen where somebody gets locked out or whatever. We just wipe it and you can start over. There's nothing, everything's stored in cloud storage and stuff like that. But even still, it's still now I'm worried, like, they're taking their laptops home, they're working all day from home. What does that home network look like? Who are their roommates? Like at the office, we have this, like, hey, make sure your laptop's always locked. And if you leave it unlocked and somebody sees it, like, we play games, like we do things like we'll do crazy internet searches, and we call it gardening the person's site laptop. What happens when you're at home and now you're with, like, trusted people, they're your roommates, but, like, I don't trust them, so keeping that in mind as well is definitely scary. And we had a similar thing where I was last couple of weeks, I've had to go into the office a couple of times and get some things ready because people don't have monitors at home. And so we wanted to make it like, well, what can we do for people? Which monitors do we want to allow out the door? And which ones, like, probably not the Apple Cinema display, like that's going to stay here. But here's, some of the other ones that we can loan out, and then having people schedule time to come in so we don't have, 20 people in the office at the same time. All, new and unique challenges. Another one was really early on, one of our sales reps, her laptop, she couldn't get it, went through an update and didn't come back up, essentially. So now what are we supposed to do? Like, if she was at the office, would be super easy. We just go to the closet, get her a new one, way you go. But now it's like, now it takes like a day and a half to diagnose and get her, get her set up again. And actually, I think it was more like 2 days when all said and done by the time she was back up and running, which was, if she was in the office, it would have been 2 hours at most.
Yeah, that's definitely the turnaround in help desk type of scenarios and supportability. I mean, so for some companies that, are not fortunate like yourselves that have, moved to cloud and have everything, moved off devices. And you think about those that are heavily dependent on things like GPO policy to be updated. Those that are heavily dependent, on data is stored locally. And now it's outside the office. Is that data even been backed up anymore? How often is the backups? And a lot of companies may have moved to more network-based security, where they're looking at, gateways and proxies and firewalls and IDSs and so forth, IPSs. And now their data is not going through any of those. It's outside in the public internet. Now, where's your visibility? I've seen a lot of companies now saying, employees spending hours on, streaming services and downloading and checking personal things on their corporate devices that you may have had more control when they're going through your own internet connection, but that's all gone out the window now they've taken it home. So that leaves the big question for a lot of, security professionals is where is my security? We know that the perimeter is gone, but now the question is, was my security on my network, or am I 100% now relying on the actual endpoint protection that's on that device and the human sitting in front of it? Is that where my perimeter security is remaining? So there's a lot of organizations that you need to really know is, one is what data is on those devices. Hopefully you're using some type of cloud storage that allows you good auditability. What local administrator access do they have when they leave? Will they be installing applications that you may not want to be on those devices? Now that you may have been able to restrict it or have better policies, but now they might be opening up to more applications, unlicensed, unauthorized, bad privacy, policies and bad security elements that could be exposing those devices to more. And then what applications will work outside the firewall? That may have proprietary applications, which, in my experience, things like, foreign exchange, money market trading systems that you may only function on the corporate network because they're reliant on things like, streaming from data services in order to populate the interfaces. How does that maintain? So, a lot of also compliance. Will you still be compliant as those devices are going outside the office, or will you now be an exposure? If a data breach does happen, now you're not compliant. And does your insurance cover you if you do have cyber insurance as well?
Oh yeah, cyber insurance is a whole nother, probably a topic for a different day.
Absolutely. But these are, I'm seeing a lot of these challenges that's going through a lot of security professionals, and trying to figure out all of these things. And will their infrastructure be able to support it?
Yeah, I was going to say VPNs. I mean, are you ready for that 9 a.m. Monday morning when everybody's VPNing in, because that's the way, that's where all the resources are, or whatever it is. I have a friend who worked at Amazon, and that was, I think, one of the things that they, like right early on in Seattle when they closed that office, had to go through, was all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of people hitting this VPN where in the past they wouldn't have been. And do you actually have the network to handle that?
Yeah. Can you actually spread it out over, some time? Can you do some type
flatten
of
the curve?
Flatten the curve. It seems to be a common term. And can we flatten that curve in VPN? Do you have some type of load balancing in order to handle it? So a lot of infrastructure questions. I'm pretty sure a lot of those, public facing services, web services, VPNs, DMZ equipment is being maxed at its limits. So it's a very challenging time, but it's a good time to try your disaster recovery plan, and also you need to update it as well to deal with these changes. Is that your disaster recovery, your business continuity, or incident response might be very dependent on you're sitting in the office, and now there's no one at any office. They're working remotely. You might have a very small crew coming in and doing critical services from the office that are keeping their social distance and so forth. But in this situation, it might be a good time to even test your incident response plan to see if it's still viable in this situation. As I mentioned, people are accessing their personal email and social media from home. What if they get a ransomware? And locks up those systems. And what if they had a VPN connection open and now it comes in through that connection into the network? How can you isolate it and keep that separation? So there's a lot of, kind of risks that's happening right now. And I think incident response definitely needs to be revisited to see if it's still viable in these situations.
Yeah. And I also think about like work from home policies. Like in the past, there were a few companies I worked at that had very rigorous, like, hey, you have to answer these questions and then we'll let you take a laptop home, right? Like, what's your home network like? Run this scan, do this. There's no way you can go through that now and expect that people. So being able to like recognize like, yeah, our work from home policy has to be updated, and make sure that you've really communicated like, what people should do in case of X, right? If your laptop gets stolen, like, what do you do? Hopefully it's not that big of an issue because we're all stuck inside.
No one's going outside. I'm pretty sure robberies are the lowest ever at this point.
But
That's
yeah,
definitely, crime is, traditional crime's gone down. It's all moved to online crime at this point.
right. Let's hope so, I guess.
Yeah. I'm
But
pretty sure
yeah.
that anyone going out the street right now in Europe gets fined.
Oh,
Um,
really?
it's in Spain, Italy, UK, and France. They're handing out fines.
Right. I
For
think I heard in France, like I guess you have to have some sort of piece of paper that you've printed out that says why you're out and walking the
which,
dog.
yeah, sort of going to the shop or exercising,
Right.
which I think is ironic, but that's what it is. That's what the governments have done in order to get people to comply,
Yeah.
because a lot of people were not taking it seriously. So, but you're absolutely right that the IT policies have to be reviewed to make sure that they actually support these types of conditions, and make sure that you're also not making your employees in a situation where they have to make a decision whether it's to do their job or break a policy,
Right.
because it might be conflicting against each other when they're actually working from home.
Yeah, and also the just making it easy for them to reach out and ask for help.
Yep.
Like because again, that you want to make sure that they're staying focused on their job, that they do
Mhm.
know like when they are bumping up against a policy or whatever, like that they know that there's a course of action they can take.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing that's been good in Estonia as well. I've been quite fortunate, to we do have a country house. So if you do have the ability, if you're not in isolation, and you can get outside, you
Hmm.
sometimes go find a good place outdoors to work as well
Hmm.
in the fresh air. We're fortunate to have a country house, which is about 45 minutes away from the city. And in the summer, I would typically go there and work from there. And it's great to be able to have an environment where you're in the fresh air, you're open, and allows you to, from a healthy work environment, it's much better. And the other thing as well, not only about where your location and you were working from, but also now is a good time for self-development. This is a good time to do the things that you may have, been putting in the backlog, saying, "Oh, when I have time, I'll get to it. When I have time, I'll
Right.
get to it." And you find yourself that in your, maybe many out there might be in a situation where some of the work might just not be possible to do from home. And therefore, now what I recommend for all companies are in those situations, give your employees as much training and education and self-development time as possible, because this is the time in order to help them actually, enhance their knowledge, enhance their skills, learn new things. Go to the likes of, get into some of the Cybrary courses
Right.
and actually start educating yourselves. For me, I think this is a critical time that companies have to make that decision. While your business might be in, stagnant right now or not doing anything, is how do you make sure you keep your employees engaged, and continuous education and self-development is one of those critical things.
Yeah, career development's really critical. And the other thing I think, not just even if you are totally capable of doing your job, right? Like maybe nothing's really changed, but you don't have the same commute that you used to have.
Yeah.
Your commute is now from your bedroom to wherever. So it's not, in theory, you should have a little bit of extra time on your hands from
Hmm.
that, if nothing else, that maybe would have been spent in an aggravating car ride. At
Yeah.
least in the U.S. in the D.C. area,
And
it's
the
an
one thing
aggravating car ride.
absolutely, one thing I have noticed, absolutely, there is no commute time. In Talon for me, it's not a lot of commute anyway.
Right.
But definitely in places like San Francisco, I lived and worked in Dublin and Sydney, all around the world, and my commute time in some of those places, even DC, may have been 2 hours, 3 hours a day. And
Hmm.
if you're, getting that time back in order to, learn something, what I find is this past 2 weeks, I've been reading a lot more books. I was impressed. One thing that Amazon did was they made auditable the kids' books free during this time.
Oh, I
So
didn't
you
realize
can
that.
now get all of the Audible kids' books are now free, and you can go online and listen to any kids' auditable book, which is, in these types of things, I think is fantastic time to do that self-development and learning. And I think it's really important as well, from an employer to say, if that commute time, learn something. One thing I've noticed from a lot of the webinars and webcasts and podcasts I've been doing over the past 2 weeks is attendance has been through the roof.
Right,
I think
right.
there's a lot more people attending and listening. So I think this is a really good time for, to take some of those things that we may have been, with conferences being canceled. I can tell you my conference schedule for the next 3 months is gone.
Right.
My travel schedule is gone. I would have been, normally last year, I attended probably just under 50 events globally. and did numerous talks, probably more than 60 different talks and workshops around the world. And that's gone for a quarter. Like 3 months of my time is just canceled from travel and conferences. So we have to find different mediums and different ways to continue sharing our knowledge and research and our experiences to others to make sure that we're continuing adding, that knowledge and value of sharing of what we're doing in regards to whether it being security research or best practices, or even just having discussions around typical challenges and topics. I think those are really important things to share. And I'm seeing people actually having that additional time to listen in and join these webinars and webcasts and podcasts and video blogs. I think it's a great thing. And I think companies should really endorse it and tell their employees, spend this time to listen to a podcast or a webinar, or even get involved and interact, or do one, participate in one. So for me, this is definitely an opportunity, self-development, new skills, learning, reading, getting those things that you've been pushing off for a long time. It's a good time to try and to get them done, check them off.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I also wonder if some of the reasons why people are joining more of the webinars and things like that is, again, it helps with connectivity, right? We've, with social distancing, you're looking for ways to interact with other people there, whether it's, through a webinar or whatever, there's probably some nice ways to sort of get some interaction outside of the house.
Absolutely. And then that's important. Technology, the great thing is that when we're in these situations, if it was 10, 20 years ago, it would be, challenging. The technology's definitely, made us being able to deal with these situations much better. Being able to, I remember when I was traveling the world 20 years ago and staying connected with my family was very difficult. You would already have planned like 1 hour of this week and this month, this is when I will call.
Right.
and they'd be standing, next to the telephone, waiting for that call to happen. And it would be collect and really expensive.
Right. Oh, that was my sister's thing. She would just call, collect, and then, and then we knew to call her back.
I remember my father saying one time, it's like, the cost of this call would have been the same price as a flight. I could have came and spent 2 weeks with you. But those situations, technology definitely has made these situations much more easier to deal with.
Yes.
And I think, one of the things that we also have to understand is mental health, isolation, even from a friends and families, make sure we, make them understand how to use the technology. Especially those who are more vulnerable that might be, having health challenges, or might be in isolation or self-quarantined, or that they might be even, an age group that are more exposed, and making sure that we show them how to use this technology and communicate and have that collaboration. So even this week, my son's learning guitar, my daughter's doing piano lessons, and we did it online. We actually had, we actually had the TV and my son doing guitar lessons with the teacher on the TV and communicating, and the same with the piano lessons as well. So we do find technology does help us to continue our lives in somewhat normal and chaotic, crisis. And that's what will get us through this.
Yeah, we had the same thing with the piano lessons with my son. Last Thursday was virtual. The one thing I'd also say is, we talked a lot about, what it's like to, work from home with family and kids. The other thing is there's a lot of people that live by themselves. And so I think it's important to just sort of check on them and make sure you're reaching out. And I think a friend of mine made a joke the other day about like, now's the time for all you introverts to check on your extrovert friends, make sure they're doing okay.
Absolutely. And one thing I'd also like to mention as well, I think, we have to also look, is that we're considering ourselves, we're helping, solve the problem by staying at home. Right. We can be superheroes by sitting and doing nothing and just continue to work remotely. But we also have to look out there to my peers and professionals and your peers, professionals who are all supporting, the health services and the production of medical equipment and the logistics of getting them to where they should be. And those is really kind of making sure, the unsung heroes, I call them the mystery men and women of security that are really kind of making the health services continue to operate, making sure that the infrastructure can support those, making sure that trucks and trade and deliveries and manufacturing can still get to where the places where they need to be at the right time. So I think a really special thank you goes out to all those providing those services, because they are in the background hidden. And that's the thing is when things are working and things are moving along, they don't get any recognition.
Right.
And for me, those security professionals, we have to thank them for what they're doing, because it's impressive to do. I've been in that situation 20 years ago, where you're in a crisis situation. Goes back to Y2K. Doing a UPS transition, basically transitioning from to generator.
Right.
And at that time, I was responsible for Northern Ireland Ambulance Service. And during that transition, the systems that actually do for the ambulances to get to the locations, that call service was down. And you're sitting looking at a clock that you have an SLA and in the ambulance service, if you go past your SLA, people die.
Right.
And that's the most stressful. Anyone asks me the question, what's my most stressful situation I've ever been in my entire career? And it's when you're looking at a system that you're actually trying to get back up and running, that when it doesn't work, people die. That's the most stressful situation. And this is what we're really in. And those that's in that same position that I was in 20 years ago are in those situations. They have to keep those systems running. They have to make sure that they know where hospital beds are and where ICU treatment is and where ventilators are, and had to make sure that they're available and functioning and working. And the people that's doing that right now, I know the stress of that. If they're not functioning, people can die.
Right.
And that's a situation where, it's the people out there that's giving, voluntary service and keeping this running. I have to kind of, praise them for the effort and work they're doing. It's amazing.
Yeah, I agree. Long time ago, I wrote a blog about like crisis management and like what you can do as a manager.
Mm-hmm.
And like one of the first things I say in there is like, just recognize no one's going to die. Right. Like, but that's not true in all situations.
Correct.
So, can't imagine what it'd be like in that world.
It is. I worked in NHS in UK, and I did medical records. And I think the most realizing for me was when I was doing the ambulance service. That was probably when the realization when you knew that if your service wasn't running for, I think it was 23 minutes in a row, that there was deaths. Deaths would happen. The ambulance wouldn't get to a accident or patient within that time frame. The statistics would say that the people die. And that's what people's in a situation is, I always kind of makes me relate to is that people's in that situation right now. You think about in hospitals around the country and globally that those systems, those, intensive care units in the hospitals and the equipment functioning, and all of a sudden if one system goes down, I can tell you that, it's roughly 23 minutes to half an hour if you don't get up and running, that you got, if there's no alternative and all are at full capacity, deaths happen. And that's what we're seeing is, massive deaths around the world, and is very likely that it's because they're maxed out in their equipment and they don't have alternatives or supplies to keep them going. Right. So those in this industry right now, that's keeping those available and keeping them function and keeping them maintained. It's, thank them for their hard work.
I couldn't agree more. Cool. So I appreciate you joining us. I think that's probably a great place to sort of end it with a nice thank you to all the hardworking people. Any final thoughts or anything?
Final thoughts is, we'll get through this. This is not the end of the world. It is a pandemic, but, technology will help us. We'll be innovative. There'll be new solutions coming out to deal with this better in the future. This is something that we'll kind of, have lessons learned from about, how we can improve in the future. And definitely, for those who's doing the remote working, we'll definitely have a more appreciation for teachers, for healthcare workers, for those that really, those are doing public service. Really, we have a much more appreciation for what they do in our society. And I think that, out of this is that, they are the heroes, is the ones that's putting themselves forward. So I think, we will innovate, we will improve, we will get through it. But definitely, it's the public servants who's the real heroes at this point.